All right. Had a weird issue there where you couldn't see me. I'm here now. All right, welcome to today's stream. It's gonna be showing too much of the room there. Gonna be a nice and smooth session today. So I came across this tool that I've been using for the Endless Engines challenge, but it's just generally a great tool for anyone having to build environments with buildings, architecture, anything like that. It has to do with procedural buildings, which means generating buildings basically just from a little bit of input. You essentially can set up these different modules for what would be a building. So your ground floor elements, your corner elements, your mid-level, your ceiling elements, all that good stuff. And once you have that all wrapped up or modeled out, you can just generate these buildings. So this is all made possible by a geometry node setup created by, spacing on his name. All made possible by a geometry node setup created by, there he is, Pavel Oliva. Put the link in the description below if you want to check it out. Definitely recommend it. It's just donation based, and I think it's probably one of the biggest biggest additions to a workflow that you could have. I've gotten a lot of useful add-ons and useful tools for Blender that help me work more efficiently, and this by far is very up there as one of my favorites. Just to go over that link a little bit, we'll switch over to the main screen. So here's the link, and here's just a little clip to kind of show you how it works. This is using, I believe, different modules generated from Megascans. So you can see you can even incorporate people or really anything that you'd like to include into these modules. Because then the geometry node setup in Blender actually just goes ahead and just populates it into these squares. There is also integration with the Blender OSM add-on. It's not something I've explored too much. I do have to sort of grind out a little bit on my Endless Engine submission. The deadline's coming up quick, and I have some work to do. So this stream is going to be really focused in on how it is that I've been using this this geometry node setup to generate my own building designs to be used with this setup. So it's a lot of flexibility that you have here and a lot of customization that you can get to. There are some random elements in the sense of like you can't fully control where things populate. You have a certain level of control, and this is the building that it essentially comes with. So we'll dive right into the Blender file. This is the file once you get it from the link, how it ends up looking or how it comes in. And it's really easy to tell right away that you have this main building that's being controlled by the geometry nodes, and you have all the different individual elements that make up this building right here. So essentially, the file's already set up also how you'd like to have it set up, in order to basically replace it with your own geometry. So here we have our ground floor walls. So as long as your ground floor elements are all within this collection, the geometry node setup will already pick it up. You just have to replace whatever's in here with your own. So just to go over a little bit about how this works, I'm gonna add my camera here real quick. There I am. Boom. Put me down there. Okay. So I know I'm live on LinkedIn. It seems like there's an issue getting me through to YouTube. Let's see here. I'm just double checking my stream, making sure it's live and healthy. No, yeah, we're good. Okay. Thanks. Okay. Yep. So, moving on. All right. So moving on, we'll look at over here into the file, how it's working out. So basically, if we go over into the geometry node setup that we have over here, I don't want to get too in depth on the technicalities of how this works. It is, you know, a product made by somebody, so I don't want to just show off all the guts of it because it is, you know, his contribution. And Blender geometry nodes have been updating very, very quickly. So it's happened where you follow a tutorial online for procedural buildings and it doesn't quite relate to the current state of Blender and how the geometry nodes are working today. Luckily, this file sort of fixes that, or, you know, it's a way to come around, future-proof a little bit some of that process, because it does work with the current version pretty perfectly, as I can tell. If we go over into rendered view, the file is also very render friendly. So I've found that I'm able to preview the building quite quickly. So as you can see, we have some wall elements and some roof elements, and then we have some props that are added onto the walls and the roof. And the way this is all structured is really helpful because you can yourself start creating some of these assets for a building and then have it populate on the building. How it works down here in the actual script, this part I can show, is we have, for example, this node group called for flat roof, and you get some parameters here that you could change. So we have our detail density. So if I mess with this, this is for the roof. If I look at the roof, we have a certain amount of details there. And if I lower the details, we got nothing on the roof. If I take it all the way up, we start populating it with more. There's also an offset for this roof level if for whatever reason that needs to happen, which is a nice little added element. And then the seed will change that setup sort of randomly, right? So there we could see we got some other additions such as these radio towers, a skylight, and this roof access. And that can be said for pretty much every element here. For the trim, we have additional options such as the flat pillar threshold, not sure what that does, but offset from pillar, we can actually offset the trim from the corners if we needed to. Of course, here I'd have to take off my height offset because it's much too high, or bring it lower. So quite a bit of customization that we can get here. There's also a seed if it were to relate to this portion. Middle floors, we have remove from bottom. So obviously we'd like to do that in this one. We'd like to remove the ground floor so that if this is set at 0, you can't quite tell unless I go inside the building, or you can tell that the props here are coming down too low. If I hit remove from bottom to 1, those props all move up. So we want to do that so that our ground floor is set there. If our ground floor is extended, you know, for a few floors, like let's say we were to include a garage, then we could extend or add a section here for a garage and increase our middle floors higher. We also have a seed for how those middle floors are set up, which is fantastic. What's most amazing about this is how quickly geometry nodes seem to work within Blender. I mean, these are all instances, which basically means that the 3D file is only reading one geometry, really. For each one of these windows, it's really all relating just to one geometry. It's just copying around graphically. So as long as you have a decent graphics card, there should be no problem to run this as efficiently as you're seeing me do here. So for the ground floor, we can also, you know, mess with the seed on that for the doors and the windows. Offset from pillar, so from the corners, we can also offset those elements if we need to. And if we needed to remove from bottom, we want that to go into negative. But yeah, it's a pretty great start for any project that has to do with sort of an urban context or anything like that, even potentially just creating experiments on what buildings could look like. We'll turn that offset to 0. And to get into it a little bit more on how this is generated, if I turn off the geometry nodes by going over here to the modifiers tab and disabling it right here, we can see it's just a footprint, right? So if I were to introduce a plane right here, oh, the origin of the model is off to the side for whatever reason. I'm not sure if I did that by accident or how that came to be. But if I were to add a plane, move that over, hit Control A because I did scale it up. And you do want to, I'll show you what happens if you don't hit Control A. If you just kind of mess with the plane, scale it up and down just like this without going into edit mode, and you add a modifier for geometry nodes, you're then able to select right here the building geometry node. And it's much too large, right? Because it hasn't actually applied that resizing that we did to the plane. So it's trying to fit that as best it can. So if instead we hit Control A and do apply all transforms, there we see it's now acting more or less properly. Why are we missing the ground floor? Is it something I did? Pillar from threshold, offset from pillar. That is the first time that that happens to me. Anywho, let's say we enable this one. Oh, what did I do? Oh, haha, I created the plane inside the collection for the building. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to put the actual planes that are related to the footprint of the building in the collections for the building modules. So I'm going to close these collections right now for ground floor, middle floor, and top trim and rooftop details, and make sure that whatever I'm using as a base is outside of those collections. So we'll give that another go, add a new plane, move that over, scale it up, create a geometry node modifier, and assign it to the building modifier. And you can even see like for whatever reason I might have scaled it into itself and in reverse, but I'll just rotate it and then Control A to apply all transforms. Now from here, some other funkiness is happening because the same thing happened. Where's my plane? Yeah, my plane went into the wrong collection again. Come on now. I want you to go into the main scene. Scene collection. There we go. Of course, when I go live to show this off is when it acts funky. So I'll just manipulate the original. So if I hit tab to edit this element right here, really the only thing we have is this ground floor surface, right? However, if I were to grab one of these edges by going into edit mode here and selecting edge mode, if I select this edge and I extrude it out, it actually starts to build more building, right? So it elongates along that way. I can go into vertex mode and select this little corner here and move it on the x-axis, and I can work with diagonals as well. Not just that, you can very simply, since it's rectangles that we're working on here, we can add a subdivision and put that before the geometry nodes here in the modifier. So the subdivision will round out some of those edges. So this is what that's looking like actually. Like that's what the footprint is currently looking like with the subdivisions. I can take that further to smoothen it out. And if I just bring this back, so it does stack them closer together and kind of tighten everything up because they are a lot of faces, right? Or a lot of edges. So you can create a curved building in this manner with the subdivision of the edges. However, a more ideal way of doing this might also be using the bevel tool in edit mode. So right here on the left hand side, we can go to bevel. So like right here for that edge. Is it? Yep. Go into edge mode, not into vertex mode. And we can add a bevel to the corners. It's hard to see with the building in the way. There we are. Vertices. There we go. So you see that bevel right there is rounding out. And if I go back into solid mode, we see it's added those bricks there and added a bit too many props. I got too many props going on. So that's over here in the geometry node setup in the second column for the wall props. We can turn down the density for the ones above. And then there's some that are limited only to the bottom section, which is all that signage. So I can turn down the density for those. I can also modify here where the random offsets happen. So if I wanted to offset these so that they don't match perfectly onto the windows, there's some degree of control of where these populate from. However, it's not an exact science. Hi there, EM. Nice to have you always. See you there commenting in the chat. My chat box used to tell me how many people are seeing or watching, but I guess it's better than it doesn't. It only shows me when people are commenting. So if you have any questions as I'm working through this, feel free to add that into the chat and I will address it if I know the answer. And if I don't know the answer, I will figure it out. So yeah, we also have a vertical offset. We can remove from bottom if we wanted these to start a certain height, or we can remove from top. So we can sort of dictate exactly where on these levels for this building we want this to generate. Something that I was messing with as well that was really cool is it works with text. So if you saw my post on this live stream, I added in a text element and I can try to apply the transforms to that. I can type in any text. So I can type in, I don't know why, just a location closest to me. I can type in Miami. I can set a geometry node for the text, and same thing. I can just set it to building, apply all transforms, fonts, can only have scale applied to text. Well, we'll do this the correct way. We'll add in some text, and instead of scaling it, we'll go over to the text area, and we will enlarge this by going over to font and increasing the font size. Here we are, and put that to 50. And now make sure that that works. Geometry nodes, building. Cool, and we just turned that text into buildings. Super easy, super quick. Could use some finessing, especially on letters such as this one. And if I can, let's see how quickly this works. So I can actually just type out whatever I'd like and see it generate as buildings on the fly, which is pretty damn cool. There's Miami. I can duplicate this and create one from New York. That's not New York. That's New York. New York. And there is some randomization on the height of the building when you create new elements like that. So that's also a nice little touch. If we go into rendered view, still working pretty flawlessly. And I can duplicate that once more. And just see how we can type live. Atlanta. Just whatever's coming to mind. That's pretty neat. There is a way to draw in some of these buildings. So just by going into top view and drawing with I have to look into that a little bit better. I tried it at first on my own, but it was working a bit funkily. Funkily, there's a word I just made up. Well, if we add in a curve, and say I add a circle curve, and move that over. Add a modifier, geometry, ooh, wrong one. Add a modifier, geometry nodes for building. So this is what I was running into. There's probably something I just got to do to the script over here and switch this up for the editor settings, but I'll look into that a little bit more and report back. What I really wanted to get to, now that I've shown the base file that comes with this, is a file that I tweaked a little bit. Just enough to show how it is that you can replace these different elements with your own. So I'm going to hide most of these things. And what I did was I added, where is it? There it is. I added a balcony element. So we can focus in on any object that we need. That's something I really needed in this session here because, you know, you can get lost with the scale of the objects and whatnot. If I want to focus on an object, I can select it. And with your number pad, you hit period, and it just zooms right into that geometry. So what I did here was not only modify the materials that came in with the existing, just slightly, to change the color of the building, but I also generated this balcony, which is not applied in this building, or it is, yes. There's just not that many of them. So you can see here the balcony module that I generated actually got thrown in with that. There is a little bit of overlap with some of the props, so watch out for that. Got to do a little bit of tweaking if that is showing up in camera. But how I went about that really was you need to, I mean, unless you're really willing to mess with the script and go into this geometry node setup, which I am willing to do up to a certain degree, but for context buildings or for just populating an environment, for me it was enough to basically copy this block. So we can go to the main wall. This is like the plain wall that is brought into this file. And what's really important about these modules that we have set up is that their origin point is at the bottom, right? This little point right here is at the bottom and at the front. Well, in this one it's the bottom front, but for some it's at the bottom center. I just find that it has to be at the bottom, right, of that geometry. So in order to do that, it's a real simple process. We can just create a new plane, right? So there's my new plane. And the reason I start with a plane is because the plane already comes with that origin point at its center. So with object mode, I can move this to snap to that corner. And then what I want to do is stretch on the axis that I need to in order to get it to snap to the other elements. So actually, this was a part that was a bit tricky. So at this point, I could go into edit mode and I could start moving these edges so that it aligns. So I'll go over here and hit edge mode, and I start moving this to basically copy this profile. I mean, honestly, with this main file, you don't even, I generated a new plane just to see if it would work, but you could even just work off of this main one. So if I duplicate it and just move it forward, we have the origin where we need it. We can just start working off of this existing rectangle. So what I did to make that balcony, if say I wanted to do something a bit different than that balcony, maybe a corner balcony, right? So we can match. Where's our corner element? Oh, there are no corner elements. I wonder how it manages the corners. That's all right. Let's geez, I'm running. Let's do a full size window. That's what we'll do. We have a balcony element. We have some small windows, but we'll do a full size window for this one. So real simple. We can go into solid mode, hit tab to go into edit mode, and do some loop cuts. So I can just add a loop cut here. Even easier, once I have this selected, I can scroll on my mouse wheel just to generate these cuts right here so that I can use these to actually generate my window. And I can then right click, have those set right there, go into face mode, or actually start generating some loop cuts now for the top of the window, for the bottom of the window. And now right here, if I see on the bottom left of my window right now, edge slide, I can bring it over to 0.6 is a good number for my mullion. I can then set up another one over here as well. This one would be negative 0.6. Get to move it over that way. And then here, in order to have it be square, it's around negative 0.94. I'll go ahead and go with that. Again, not to be too pesky with units. They're not that important when it comes to just doing visual work. So 0.94. So now that we have that, go into face mode, just like you would typically model something, you know? We can select these faces. And actually, I'd want to push all of this inward with extrude. There we go. Maybe just about that far. I'm kind of referencing what's back there, just kind of eyeballing it. Cool. Actually, I'm going to undo that. Move it back, but not as much, so then I can just grab my glass and move my glass slightly backward. Okay. I can now introduce new loop cuts towards the center here. So just about there, we're looking at something square. That's 0.6. Actually, I don't want it to be 0.3, so I can do it at both sides. So 0.3, or no, the number gets larger as I get closer. I'm gonna turn off object snap. What do we want? 9.6. The number does get larger, so let's go with 0.75. I gotta heighten my precision modeling skills in Blender just to kind of have this consistency where I can just type in numbers and have it do what I intended to do. Because most of the time you can get away with doing things visually, but I feel like even me, I'd work faster if I could just type some numbers in. And that's something I'll get into at the end of this video in terms of like approach to learning Blender. So here we have this module, which is a full-size window. We actually duplicated it from this original wall. So technically speaking, it should already be included in the set that is used for the building. Let's see if we can find it anywhere on here. And we cannot. So that's all right. I'll show you. Actually, this one does have it. So the other one didn't include it, but this one we can see already, because I duplicated from this plain wall, and this would used to be plain wall, but then got replaced by the new module, the full-size window. Should be a little bit, I don't know if I've ever seen a full-size window right at the corner of a building like that, but. And, you know, we go through our typical thing. We get into edit mode. We select these panels, which would be glass. Go over to materials, add a new material slot, and we select our general reflective material here that came included with the file. And now that's glass. We have everything else selected as concrete, so I can just select all these mullion faces. It's easier if you start, I mean, I don't know if it's easier. It's like most of the time before you extrude faces, like when I first set the cuts for the mullions, if you assign the material to it, when you then extrude it, it should carry through that material on the sides that it has on the front face. Although I've had that not be the case in certain circumstances, so a little bit of a research I'd got to do in that area to see why that is. Okay, door material, no. I think we go with the white material. No, we'll do the gray. There we go. So that's it. Full-size module. We just added a new element to the building. So we added balconies. I did that on my own off stream, and then now we have a full-size window. I could even select all these faces now that I have them and push. Oh, in order to push them outward, I'd have to also select these inside faces. If I just want it to expand a little bit. I think I'd want to do it with these as well. There we are. Scale that outward. I'm not going to worry about my cuts right now. Just going to make that window bigger. Now we can check back on our building. And here we are. Whoops. I don't know why that just came up. We can look over here. Nope, wrong period. There we go. We can see that it's updating on every floor. I don't have to copy it over once I make changes. I don't have to delete what I did and then add the new thing. I can expand here on my geometry nodes, go to my middle section, middle floors, and I can mess with the seed here. And we can see that that populates, moves throughout, works with the script seamlessly. We see that the balcony elements are also working there and pretty extended. It'll kind of stretch to fit however it needs to onto that face, which I think is kind of nice. I mean, if you were to scrutinize it from up close, maybe things start to look a bit distorted, such as the mullions. But from far away, I mean, we could just start copying over and over, making a ton of different buildings all throughout, changing their size, changing their parameters, and whatnot. So that's about where I wanted to go with this video, with this live stream. I know it's a sweet and short one. I got to get back onto my endless render challenge and grind that out. The deadline is coming up. And that brings me to why I wanted to make this video today in terms of learning Blender, roadblocks, buying or using other people's tools and other people's resources. I really just so some people that I've recently spoken to that have been getting into Blender, they're starting to learn Blender from the modeling perspective, right? So learning how to model, then learning how to texture, then learning, kind of scaling up from there. That's not at all how I learned Blender. I was really good at well, I am really good still, maybe less so because I don't use it as much, but I used Rhino mainly for modeling and doing that sort of thing. And yes, absolutely, like this type of tool, you're right, EM there in the chat, is very, very neat and very useful, right? Especially if you're starting out and you don't understand geometry nodes like I do. I got hit with a moment like that, right? Where it's like I've been learning all these things. Like I actually started from rendering, lighting, and materials. So kind of started from there, learning just how to set up a scene, and I bring all my models from elsewhere. Then, once I started to get comfortable with that, I started tackling, actually, I first started tackling the shader nodes. So not these nodes, but the shader nodes. And that was a good, I can't see any, there we go. Such as this one. This is not, this material comes with a pack, but I started learning shader nodes, starting to understand how we can bring in, different elements here and work with these. And this is actually very similar to Grasshopper in Rhino, if you're familiar with that world. But I started learning through shader nodes and really got good at this for materials. And really modeling is something I think I even tackled after animating, learning how to keyframe and all that. So what I'm getting at is, what is the end goal that you're using the software for? If you're just learning it to learn it as a hobby and you have all the time in the world, that's great. I needed you can, go about it as you wish. You can go course by course and check your boxes. But I was using it professionally before I even understood how to model in the software. And that's because I modeled everything outside and then I just set up my render scenes in Blender. Now that I'm getting into this geometry node world, I realize I've barely scratched the surface of this software. It is so dense. It is so free. It is so, there's just so much to it, right? So I got a little bit discouraged as I started learning procedural nodes or procedural methods through the geometry nodes, because it's just a whole other world. It just made me realize, like, wow, lighting, rendering, and materials is really like just scratching the surface of what the software can do. However, if you know those things, you can get some really great renders out of the software, right? You could spend weeks and weeks learning how to model, but your renders might still look not that great, right? Because you haven't tackled these other things. So that was my approach. If you have any questions, by the way, you can pop them in through the chat. Happy to answer them. And yeah, just wanted to give that little explainer as to why I went this route, because in a previous stream, I had built out some modules for context buildings that I wanted to use in my Endless Engines challenge. However, I realized that building out that entire environment was going to take me quite a while. And I just gifted this guy some money and I got this amazing tool that he had created. And I think supporting other people in the community in Blender that are generating these resources for each other is also a big chance to learn off of each other. That's really how Blender is advancing so quickly, is the fact that it's open source and it's free. Not only are there people generating tools for the software, but ideas are being exchanged, right? Such as this one. So big shout out to the creator of this this geometry node setup, Pavel Oliva. Thank you so much. This has helped me on the track of learning geometry nodes greatly, but it's more importantly helped me get to finishing my project much quicker, which is infinitely valuable. You can't put a price on time. So saving that time when you have a goal in mind is huge. So with that, I'm going to log off if there's no chats coming through. Oh, there's a question. How's the car design going? So the car design is going. It is going. I've realized that I could get away with using my own car for the challenge. However, maybe it's not ideal. And I'd had to pivot from that idea a little bit. Luckily, the way I've set up my animation, I can substitute the car. Like, it's not that big of a deal. There's just these, because all these animation, all these car movements, the movement of the tires and all these things, they're actually tied to things that are called empties. So if I just show that real quick, since I have this open, if I hit Shift A and I add an empty, there's like different empties, plane, axis, single arrow, images, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's really just empty geometry. Like, there's nothing in it or to it. If we see here, it shows up as this sort of crosshair. And the point of empties is if I put this in the center of this building and I select the building, I hit Control P and I set set parent to object. Now when I move, just kidding, the other way around. I first select the building and then I select the empty and I hit Control P and I set parent to object. Now the building is parented to that empty. So I'm not actually moving the building when I do this. I'm moving the empty. So the way I've set up the animation is all through empties, like to have the car move. So if I just switch the car out, all I have to do is like reparent the empties, and then the car is now animated to those empties. So the car modeling is going. It's just as I started doing some car modeling tutorials, I realized it's an entire world to get into that I am loving to get into. However, there's a deadline, and I have car models from work, from personal use, or free ones that are available online. So I've actually, for my submission, I'm probably going to go with a pre-made model. And that's just for the sake of completing that challenge. However, I love that it's put me on that path for car modeling, because it is, I think if anybody looking into getting into modeling, something I think a good procession would be doing products or household objects, moving on to furniture, and then moving on to buildings even. I think buildings are much, maybe I'm just saying that because architecture, whatnot. I find buildings way easier than cars. Cars is by far one of the harder things that I've found for modeling. They're just so nuanced in their curves. You have to get them just right. And maybe that's just also something with repetition, right? As you do your first car, you do your second, you've done 20, 30 cars, and you do nothing else. And that's all you know. Maybe the level of difficulty changes in that sort of scenario. But as you're trying to do several things or learn several things or coming from a different background like myself, cars are tricky. So yeah, gonna get onto my endless challenge now. If there's any other questions before I log off finally, you can shoot them my way over here on the chat. Otherwise, thank you for tuning in. Love to have you. Always love to have you. I'm gonna do more consistent posting on when it is that I'm live streaming. And as you can see, I'm trying to plan out these videos or these streams a little bit better, keep them a bit more concise, a bit more bite-sized. And really, I'm interested in putting out these clips of the live stream so I can see also the feedback as to what people are interested in seeing. But this is very much a channel on experimenting, very much about thinking how we work and how we learn, more so than, you know, there's amazing tutorials and amazing courses out there already. So this is more about process and more about creative freedom. So again, I thank you for joining. Have a great night. I'll catch you on the next one.